Yellowjackets Season 3, Episode 3, Them's the Breaks is out, and I have thoughts. This is Double Issues, I'm Kat. Let's get crackin', cause it's time to dive back into everyone's favorite world of cannibals and old friends. Spoilers ahead. Mari was watching Eureka's castle when she sat by her younger cousin as they died from brain cancer. Mari sat in the waiting room for her parents to come. The same show was playing there, so she finished the episode. Ben asks, "Why do you tell me that?" Mari replies that I think there are two versions of reality. Most of the time, the bad one is just hiding or waiting. This conversation is almost frustratingly vague. Almost. At its core, it's about duality, two versions of the same story. But duality in the context of Yellowjackets can mean a million different things. The whole story is told from two different timelines. But since it's Mari and Ben in the past talking about this, it's probably not what they're referencing. Later in the episode, we delve into the dream world and how there's only one dream. It's a clear distinction between their real world and the hallucinated one they've all experienced, whether inhaling poisonous gas or starving. The director of the episode, Jonathan Lisco, also stated that this episode showed the lines between the objective and the subjective were blurring together for the girls. Most likely, though, I think this conversation is tied into how the group perceives their life, whether it be in a positive or negative light, especially how Van versus Shauna's retelling of the story were told at the start of It Girl. Van recounts their adventures in the wilderness as if the Yellowjackets are all heroes who have overcome the greatest of odds to survive another day, thanks to the power of friendship. Shauna, meanwhile, sees them as cannibalistic monsters who will never be able to readjust to normal society, though the truth of their situation can only be found when both are combined. The bad version of reality is just waiting for them as they coast through the summer, but it's all real. Both stories are equally true. That's why Mari says that the bad version of reality is just hiding. The girls are practically coasting through summer at the moment. Food is plentiful, the weather's warm, and they still have a nice little village of huts. Even when the conditions are better, though, they are still ultimately trapped in the wilderness. Once the weather turns again, they're still in the same episode, the same situation. But the inevitability of what they'll have to do once the weather turns will loom over them. Older Tai is a full-blown wilderness believer now, a stark contrast to her skeptical younger self, and even her reluctant adult self at the end of season 2. To be fair, Tai's sacrifices of her dog made her a senator, and the waiter's death saved Van. Van, meanwhile, trying to give into the wilderness at the end of season 2 led to Natalie dying. Tiny Cypress's acting in the scene where Van and Tai both spill their secrets goes crazy hard. It's hard to tell when or if it's actually other Tai speaking to Van. Tai will do anything to keep Van. She's already lost everything else that gave her life meaning. She's getting divorced, she can't see her son, she had to give up being senator. Van coming back into her life reignited a spark in her, and knowing that she could keep Van around and grow old with her is her main motivating force. Fast forwarding through the VHS of Pee-wee's Playhouse, we see the big reveal that the man with no eyes was from an unreasonably creepy ice cream ad that Tai saw as a child and projected as her representation of death after her grandmother died, describing a man who looked like the one in the ad. This doesn't mean that he's just Tai's hallucination though, as this could simply be the physical representation of another force at work. On the hunt for answers about the ice cream shop, Tai and Van go check out the rundown establishment and spot a coyote who killed a rabbit stare back at them. Tai asks, "What does it want?" And Van responds with what it always wants, more. I suspect that means that we're going to see a lot more violence and sacrifices from Tai this season in an effort to appease the wilderness and keep Van alive. An ideology which I see Van being rather opposed to if it means that other people are getting hurt to keep herself alive. But we'll circle back to this when we talk about who I think is dying this season. One thing that annoyed me on a first watch of Them's the Breaks is that the previous episode left off on two really big moments that are hardly addressed this episode. However, that doesn't mean that their effects aren't being felt though. This episode, younger Shauna's demeanor has started to shift a little more towards the lighter side. Instead of spitting in Mari's food, she's comforting her as she tries to remember directions back to Coach Ben's man cave. She tells Nat to take care of herself, and even in her brief conversation with Melissa, almost smiles. I think that even if Shauna struggles with the idea of showing anyone affection after losing Jackie and her baby, she can appreciate that someone is feeling it for her even when she's at her worst. Shauna and Backwards Hat Girl aren't going to be the healthiest of relationships, thanks to Shauna's emotional repression, but Shauna will probably still get a lot of reassurance from the fact that Melissa likes her. We know that Melissa loves The Princess Bride, a notably very romantic movie, so Melissa might look at their dynamic with rose-covered glasses, even if Shauna's manipulating her. On the topic of dangling threads left from episode 2 that may or may not involve Hilary Swank, why on earth would Shauna think it's Misty that was messing with her? We see her ask the restaurant receptionist what the person looked like who picked up the phone. Would she not have at least a vague description, unless that description was simply blonde? Not to mention that Misty is a rather selfish character, as evidenced by destroying the breaker box and vandalizing Nat's car to force them to hang out together. She would never intentionally put herself in harm's way. Shauna is a very smart character, so it's weird that she would immediately think that this was Misty's fault, apart from the fact that it's no secret that she just generally dislikes her. Misty even lashes out at her beloved Caligula and burns away the group picture from their high school reunion in a show of anger, probably leading to her trying to reconnect with Walter to get any kind of support. It seems like the show is trying to push all the adult survivors back apart, but I think they did a much better job at forcing Lottie away. Lottie only has the best intentions, even if they usually lead to the worst outcomes. She wants to appease the wilderness, to keep as many people safe as she can, even if it doesn't save everyone. When Shauna sees that Lottie's given Callie Jackie's necklace, Shauna rightfully freaks out. They did, after all, use it to mark their sacrifices to cannibalize. Lottie says that it never meant what you thought it meant, which is fair. Sure, Jackie and Pit Girl both died from wearing it, but when Nat wore it, she survived the hunt, and Shauna is in possession of the necklace when she's giving birth. It isn't always a symbol of death. Another large significance is how it ties Callie to Jackie. Shauna's daughter has always held a bit of her mom's dead ex-best friend in her personality-wise, a connection that Shauna resents because of all the guilt she continues to feel decades after Jackie froze to death. Callie knows that Shauna is still obsessed with Jackie. Callie is simply a teenage girl craving her mother's attention by emulating the one thing she can never let go of. Van's dream sequence features a cabin from long before the Yellowjackets plane ever crashes. It is fully furnished and in tip-top condition. Van takes a seat to watch the fire, imagery that's been haunting Van the whole season, notably when older Van is in the restaurant and staring around at all the different candles. Van has already had multiple near-death experiences with fire, including the original plane crash, her failed cremation, and the cabin fire. She watches as an ember hops out of the fireplace, and the cabin is enveloped by flames, as her rocking chair is turned into a seat from the plane. 4 arms attack her, belonging to the cabin guy, Javi, Jackie, and Laura Lee, all notable deaths from previous seasons. I think this dream is telling us that Van knows the origins of the fire. It could have happened accidentally, but that's boring. So I would say that Van knows that other Tai set the fire and is living with that guilt. She's one of the strongest attackers against Ben, because if everybody is too busy blaming him, they won't be blaming Tai. We see older Tai burning the matchbox as well, in memoriam of the waiter. Van's secret is surely going to come out at some point, but it may not surface until after the trial is over. Akila's dream sends her to a beautiful clearing in the forest. She comes across and eats the berries that seem to be plentiful in front of her. This is a worrying sight, considering the popular pomegranate theory in the show. When Jackie drinks the hot chocolate, she dies. When Lottie is stopped from eating the Chinese food, she lives. Therefore, Akila eating the berries could signify an impending demise for her character. After the berries, she comes across a much more idealistic version of her farm. There's a white picket fence housing chickens and sheep. It's a sharp contrast to the reality of the ducks and rabbits she's actually raising. She comes face to face with the talking llama, who offers her words of wisdom. The llama, noticeably not wearing a hat, says that everything with teeth bites. Everything will defend itself. Akila is a nice person. Even in the midst of the wilderness and everybody driving each other crazy, she offers Travis Mortimer for comfort after his stressful trip with Lottie. The llama is probably teasing the idea that Akila will only take so much before she's pushed over her breaking point. Lottie is also trying to get her to commune with the wilderness more, which will probably not be healthy given how it's affecting Travis, though she'll probably be more willing to try it anyway after her crazy experience in the shared hallucination. Lastly, Akila is noticeably wearing the pink Converse, seen as one of the girls stands over the Pit Girl in the first episode. And while they all swap clothing enough not to be a major clue, it's still a fun detail. Shauna's dream has her swimming in the lake, in the same type of dress that Lottie wore when she was being baptized by Laura Lee. Not because it's horrifying, because for the first time in months, Shauna is happy. In fact, it's probably the happiest she's been in the whole show, but the fact is that it's not real, and no matter how hard or fast she swims, she'll never be able to really have her son. The fact that she'll never be able to know her son is heartbreaking. Shauna is haunted by the guilt of not being able to deliver her son, and by this beautiful dream world where she got to meet him. Maybe she could have been a good mother if it weren't for everything that happened out in the wilderness, but it destroyed her emotionally so much that she could never connect with her daughter. But just for a second, we can see how much love and joy she would have felt for her firstborn. Notably, each dream has a strong individual element tied to it. In Van's dream, they're engulfed by fire, Akila is swallowed by the earth, and Shauna is drowned under the lake. On the chalkboard, Teacher Lottie has written out, "Of all the ways to lose a person, death is the kindest." There are definitely plenty of deaths of Yellowjackets to compare this point to. The quote is from Ralph Waldo Emerson's Self-Reliance and Other Essays. The meaning of the quote is that death is the best way for a relationship to end, because the alternatives mean that the people involved have to hurt each other in some way. For example, when Laura Lee died, she stays this perfect person in Lottie's mind. Everyone still respects her and they hold a moment of silence in her honor. Meanwhile, something like Van and Ty's inevitable separation at the end of the teen timeline is a lot more painful. Death is at least a clean separation. Betrayal or estrangement are a lot more complicated, which is part of what makes the show so fun. Jackie's appearance in the episode was such a great reveal in the trio's culminating dream sequence. A perfect pan-up from the number 9 where you already know whose jersey that is. Her presence gave the dreams a real feeling of depth and importance. She passes her slap bracelet to Akila, who easily puts it on. then it's passed to Van, who gets cut by it, then Jackie forces the bracelet around Shauna's neck, suffocating her. There's so many layers to what this dream is, to the differences in reactions, to Jackie's indifferent attitude, and Lottie's role as their teacher. The slap bracelet could represent the girls' acceptance of the wilderness. We know Akila's grown more in line with it this season, and so the bracelet doesn't hurt her. Van accepts the wilderness even when it has continued to hurt her, whether via wolves or fire. Shauna, meanwhile, doesn't accept their situation and hates the wilderness and everything it has taken from her. The wilderness is instead forced upon her. The choking is also a callback to the line, "You're so jealous of me, you can hardly breathe," that Jackie told Shauna during their final fight. Now Shauna literally can't breathe. It also represents the suffocating force that is Jackie on Shauna's life. She can never escape from her memory or guilt of what happened. Then there's also the fact that the slap bracelet is slightly rainbow tinted. It's hinted at in season 1 and especially in season 2 when Jackie says, "That's not what you're hungry for," that Shauna had a crush on Jackie. After her kiss with Melissa, she may finally be able to understand what her feelings towards Jackie really were. Shauna simultaneously hated and was in love with Jackie. There is also a poster in the background featuring Hamlet, definitely a notable Shakespeare play, and the origins of the phrase "perchance to dream" in the "to be or not to be" soliloquy. Both in the play and in Yellowjackets, the line between sleep and death is a thin one. Back in season 1, Tai even says that death feels like falling asleep. In the play, "perchance to dream" is a reference to a suicidal ideation. This, in combination with the line, "There's only one dream" from Lottie, shows that the Yellowjackets' near-death experiences are all connected in a shared unconsciousness, and further connected to their dead compatriots. The barricade in the cave blocked off the area of the cave that Mari had previously been staying in. We also see Coach Ben talking to someone after capturing Mari. Whether that person was real or a hallucination is still up for debate. I think that the idea that there is another person out there in the wilderness with them is a real possibility. Avi did mention having a friend out in the wilderness, one who presumably had the queen card that he returned to the deck and maybe did something with Crystal's body. So some mysterious person is living out in the woods just under their noses. So where's Hilary Swank at? I've watched so many interviews and the cast isn't even allowed to say which timeline she's interacting with, which is kind of crazy. The end of episode 2 really teases up the idea that Swank is playing adult Melissa, but at the same time, the show does like leading the viewer on a wild goose chase, like Adam being the blackmailer or Jeff cheating. The biggest hint that it is Melissa is the fact that they gave Swank blue eyes, which would match Jenna Berg's, and that Swank doesn't naturally have. Although I don't think it's possible for Hilary Swank's character, no matter who she is, to be the person trying to kill Shauna. In the trailer, we see her ask, "You really are crazy," which, if she was trying to kill her, she would probably already know. The screams in the woods have been alarming everybody out in the wilderness, but their origin is unknown. They can't seem to locate the origin of the noise, and they were notably not present in the first 2 seasons. We also have a clue in Ozzy's ice cream parlor voice message that says, "The screams are not what they seem." One popular theory that I love is the idea that there's drilling, namely fracking, going on in the forest. It would explain why it only just started, and why it's so loud. It would also be interesting because the wilderness is such an integral part of the show that a force harming the wilderness would be an interesting turn. Lastly, who do I think is dying at the end of the season? My number 1 pick is probably Van. I could definitely see her dying if Taissa has gone down a dark path just to try to keep her alive with sacrifices to the wilderness. Also, just based on the vibes of every interview, it seems like things are not going well for Tai Van this season. But whether that's 90s timeline or 2020s timeline is unclear. Even if Van's in remission from cancer, 100 other things are always after the Yellowjackets anyways. Bonus points if it's Tai who kills Van. Next up is Jeff. His death would affect both Shauna and Callie significantly, especially if either of them killed him. His character doesn't have a lot going on outside of his wife, and his death would signify a darker shift for the 2020s timeline, since he often acts as a comedic relief. Meanwhile, back in the wilderness, I would be surprised if Coach Ben made it past the next 2 episodes. They're about to put him on trial for burning down the cabin, and will probably find him guilty no matter what. They could execute him for the crime, or try to keep him prisoner, possibly to try and save him to eat in the winter. If the latter is true, then I could see Natalie mercy killing him in order to avoid the girl's torments. Alright, well that about does it for me here. Also, it took me embarrassingly long to realize the episode is called Them's the Breaks because somebody possibly rhyming with Schmillery Schmank cut the brakes of Shauna's minivan. Let me know what you think is going to happen next. I've got to go rewatch the end of Dislocation another 20 times. Later, nerds.